We've been on a bit of a DMG colorized re-release tangent in the Game Boy Color series recently, haven't we? With mixed results, it's fair to say. The Rugrats movie from a couple of episodes back was a terrible game in the first place, and really didn't justify a reissue so soon after the black and white one, especially because none of the glaring gameplay issues were actually fixed. Then we saw the Smurfs Nightmare get colored in, which definitely fared better, as it was a great platformer already that only had a European release beforehand and was now also issued in North America. The next two titles in our chronological Game Boy Color exploration also on the surface look as though they might be re-releases, but in fact that's not the case. Developers Digital Eclipse and publishers Midway teamed up to release two cartridges on March 1st, 1999 in franchises that had already received Game Boy ports before now. However, they were both previously tackled by other developers, and so what we have here are actually brand new attempts at the games. Next week we'll see how Midway tackled two classic Williams arcade games in their Joust/Defender double pack, also attempted by Williams themselves in Arcade Classic 4. However, this week let's have another go at Paperboy, a title that developers Tengen had two very poor stabs at early on in the Game Boy's lifespan. If there ever was a title that justified another attempt at, Paperboy might well have been it. The original Game Boy versions were not good, being far too zoomed in to allow for accurate or fun gameplay. You simply couldn't anticipate what was coming up, something very important in Paperboy clearly, because your maneuverable area of the screen was relegated to the bottom right quarter corner, with massive swathes of the screen taken up by detailless blocks of grey. Then, of course, not long after the first one, they churned out Paperboy 2, which fixed nothing, merely making some of the levels go to the top left instead of the top right. But hey, Paperboy isn't a series that's exactly renowned for graphical integrity or anything like that, and that's not really what I ask for on Game Boy anyway. All you really require is for the visuals to not hamper the gameplay, and thankfully this version of Paperboy takes a much more sensible viewpoint than its monochrome ancestor. You're zoomed out much to the same distance as you got with the very popular NES version, and boy does it help things. You don't lose anything because of this concession either. It's not as if the hyper-close aspect from before was done to allow for any fancy details anyway, and arguably that stuff is actually better here. House numbers are actually visible and count downwards towards the 1, 2, or 300 figure depending on what course you're on. This tells you how far away from the end of the route you are. There are still some occasional issues with obstacles and hit detection. Every now and then you'll crash without even noticing there was something to hit, but that's more often than not on the player. You do still get the traditional nonsense that's present on basically any version. The difficulties brought on by the isometric view in terms of lining up your bike to collect more papers or avoid hazards and so on. The intersecting road with tons of traffic that's really tricky to cross without wiping out. It can be done, but it's very tough. Pixel perfect paper placement requirements. Unless the paper lands in the mailbox or on the doormat, there's a good chance the customer will cancel their subscription anyway. But that's all standard Paperboy stuff that you expect regardless of console. While quite a unique game for the time when it originally came out, I'm certainly not sure a port in 1999 was massively appealing to anyone, and victims of the earlier Game Boy versions may have been put off without even realizing this is a different make altogether. Still, the Game Boy Color Paperboy edition does sort of feel like a wrong has been righted somewhat. Having 3 different courses is a nice concept too, although their actual difficulty doesn't seem to be as varied as the game would suggest. It's miles better than either of Tengen's attempts, and sits nicely in the library as a title that you can play for 10 minutes on a coffee break, or at the bus stop or something. It's got zero longevity past that, but then the game never really did.